Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So I would like to introduce Jeremy Grisham, who will be talking about mitigating compassion, fatigue through self-care. Jeremy is a licensed counselor in Washington State, an adjunct faculty with a national nonprofit university, and is currently serving as the Director of Counseling and Wellness Programs for your Washington State Department of Veterans Affairs. Jeremy has extensive experience in nature-based therapeutic interventions as an ecotherapist and specializes in the treatment of trauma and complex traumas, in addition to generational and systemic traumas. Currently, Jeremy is a Doctor of Education candidate whose research is focused on the evaluation of the self in response to systemic pathologies. Jeremy lives in Everett, Washington with his two sons. He is a proud father of two adult daughters and a proud grandfather of one granddaughter. Jeremy's professional practice is founded on self-reflection and the approach of unconditional positive regard for himself, his community, and the many individuals and their circumstances of which he has led the privilege to align. In this presentation, we will discuss self-care. We will define self-care from a broader context, but begin to focus on the meaning of self-care for the individual and community. Self-care does not have to be a grand gesture, though it can be. Self-care also comprises of the small acts that promote wellness in the individual, such as reframing negative self-talk, getting plenty of rest, and communicating needs effectively and with compassion for self and others. Objectives for this course are to define self-care from a personal perspective, identify effective strategies for implementing self-care in our daily lives, and discussing the health benefits of self-care, in addition to understanding the health risks of a life without self-care. Jeremy?
Dang, I forgot I had written all that. Hi everyone, my name is Jeremy Grisham. That was weird listening to that file being read out loud. But yeah, let's see. Well, let's start with this. Welcome to Mitigating Empathy through empathy fatigue through self-care. We will be talking about what self-care looks like and what empathy fatigue looks like. And this will be a collaborative conversation between all of us because both empathy fatigue and the demonstrations of what that looks like, how it manifests and how it occurs within our daily lives, and how we approach self-care is deeply individualized. And so we're going to be talking, it's not, I guess what I'm getting at is it's not a cookie cutter response, right? So this would be different for every single one of us. So it would be inauthentic for me to say, hey, this is exactly what you need to do. Here's the roadmap to self-care, and this is what it's going to be like for you if you start to feel burnout or empathy fatigue or compassion fatigue. What the key to self-care in my practice, what I've discovered really is through a practice of self-reflection. So if we're communicating with ourselves in such a way that we're asking tough questions like, what's going on with our lives? Are we aware of what we're thinking and feeling? And what are we feeling both emotionally and where we're holding that inside our bodies makes a big difference. And that's a key first step into approaching self-care. So the objectives today, we'll define empathy. We'll talk about, we'll identify and discuss empathy fatigue, what it is, or I said, what is it? I'm not sure if there's a grammar issue there. And how does empathy fatigue affect you, your professional practice, and those you serve? How many individuals here work with veterans? Okay. All right. So it looked like pretty much everybody here. And so I imagine, though, that when you're working with veterans, you're working with a lot of complex circumstances. And no two individuals are just like the other. Is that correct? We will introduce ourselves to self-care and why it matters. Big or small, what matters most to you matters most in your self-care practice. We will talk about finding your work-life balance, and then taking care of yourself, taking care of others as acts of unconditional positive regard. And when I say unconditional positive regard, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? What does that look like from your perspective?
I'm gonna be honest, I know that it's not necessarily, but the first thing that comes to my mind is almost toxic positivity, where you're just I always have to be happy, so I'm just gonna continually tell myself that it's great, life is good, and I shouldn't be upset.
That's a great point that you made just now, that sense of toxic positivity. And you're right, unconditional positive regard is an approach in which we, through a lens without bias, give ourselves permission to be who we are, right? We live in a society that's filled with bias and stigmas and pressures, right? Expectations. Is that true?
Yeah.
If we don't do something right, we're beating ourselves up, and and other people are beating us up as well also. And especially when we're serving veterans and the expectations are on us to do the right thing, to be perfect, to come through, to follow up, to follow through, and so on and so forth, right? So if we don't meet expectations, what happens?
Shame.
I heard something.
Shame.
Shame? Yeah. Guilt?
The veteran might not get the service they need if we don't meet the expectations,
Yep, that's true, and that right there has a consequence. In addition, outside of our work with veterans, when we're at home, if we make a mistake or something happens, we tend to beat ourselves up pretty rough. So unconditional positive regard is an approach that says, okay, this happened, it sucks. What am I going to do to change that? How can I reframe that negative self-talk into something that's less toxic positive? And so when I say reframing negative self-talk, for example, I'm not really saying I don't want you to be a cheerleader. I don't want you to be a cheerleader for your veterans. I don't want you to be a cheerleader for yourself. What I'm asking you is to say, okay, for example, one thing I used to do often is say, I'm stupid. I used to think I was stupid. And sometimes that still comes up. But instead of saying stupid, I could say, you know what, I'm not really getting that right now, but in time, it'll make sense. Or in time, I'll get it. Or in time, I'll figure it out. So it's about removing the edges of that sharpness, of that critical impact. So there was already an introduction. I don't know if it said in there that I was a hospital corpsman. Everyone familiar with what a hospital corpsman is? I always have a joke. It's not very good, but a hospital corpsman is like an army medic, but better. It's true. It's not true. But it's not. I am an ecotherapist. What does that mean? What does that look like? I cut my teeth post-retirement, post-medical retirement from the service in habitat restoration, in restoring environmental ecosystems local to South Seattle and Snohomish County and other places, and eventually across the state. When I started that practice, I had no clue that it would turn into a 12-year, the engagement of identifying ecotherapies for veterans in Washington State through the Veterans Conservation Corps. And effectively what I ended up doing was using habitat restoration as a physical metaphor for healing and growth from trauma. Right? Because in healing the planet, the tagline for the Veterans Conservation Corps is, in healing the planet, you heal yourselves. So in helping others as an act of self-care, we also help ourselves, help our community, and we also help ourselves. So let's talk about empathy really quick. And why did I put this first? Okay, well maybe I wanted to. I wanted to define empathy so that we can have a deeper understanding of what empathy fatigue is. And by definition, empathy is the ability for one to observe, understand, and share what others are feeling and what they are feeling and why they are feeling the way they do. What does that look like? I'll tell you what, and when I'm working with a client, when they're describing their circumstances, when they're feeling the consequences of their circumstances and the impact of the pressures that they're facing, it hurts. It hurts me to sit with them and to share with them. And I don't look at that as a bad thing, because it gives me an opportunity to truly appreciate where they're coming from. Even if I have no clue, I have no bearing and no experience in their circumstances. That's true for everybody, right? Because you're the experts of your life. And someone like me is just there to listen, observe, pay attention, point things out, offer different perspectives, and so on and so forth. Right? So when we're learning about other people, then we start to have this connection with them that gives us an opportunity to be present with what they're going through, to be a witness, and also as an ally to walk with them until solutions are found, whatever that looks like. Okay, now is the time for discussion on empathy fatigue. What is it? From your perspective, and I'm really hoping to have a robust conversation here. Yes?
For me, it's when you spend so much of your time and presence and energy being present for other people, and it can sneak up on you. You don't even realize that you might be doing this with your own tank pretty much almost empty, if not on fumes. And that's when you start hitting the fatigue, or that ship sailed and you're no longer fatigued, you're just freaking exhausted. And I think that's when burnout begins. You know, and that in turn impacts how present you may or may not be for that other person.
Thank you very much. Yes?
I'd say it's like when I have not any emotions left. Like I can notice like I'm hanging out with my friends after work and they're telling me some story and I'm just like, no reactions, no compassion, just like, yeah, okay, like, I don't know what to say to you. Yeah, whatever. Like, I don't know. Got nothing left.
Yeah. So emotional numbness is something that you experience. What are some other thoughts about what that looks like? Yes, sir.
Looking for excuses to not go to work because you need that mental break.
Yep. I appreciate that. What that looks like, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I've noticed that I just hide. I'll just try and stay far away from people and just keep to myself.
Thank you very much. And I do the same thing too. Yes.
I find it's very different than actually experiencing burnout with empathy fatigue when you're engaging with a veteran or even a client in general. You lack that compassion and that active listening that you're doing with that client, and then they can come, and then you continue to do that with your entire caseload.
Yeah, and I think, did everyone hear what she said? The empathy fatigue is a demonstration where you lack that emotional connection with the client that you're working with. So you're no longer able to respond effectively, like as connected partner, as an ally within the therapeutic alliance, or whatever that alliance is in your definition. That you disconnect so much that they can tell that you're not aligned with them. And it's not that you don't care, right? Except that now there's nothing left to care.
Right now you don't.
Yes.
Isn't there a reverse to that, where you're over-sympathizing, over-empathizing, and you're just bringing and doing and crying with them?
Yes. Yeah, and that's a great point also, because there can also be a consequence where we're like, maybe it's overcompensating, or maybe we lose connection with our emotional selves. We stop self-reflecting. We stop looking at where we're at. So then all of a sudden our emotions are just spilling out everywhere because we have lost that checks and balance. Right. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
I consider emotional fatigue a buildup of vicarious injury.
Oh yeah.
To the point where we're self-protecting by doing a lot of the things that we're discussing here.
And thank you for bringing that up also, because a lot of the times when we're working with other people, we're observing, we're learning about trauma, right, from their lens. And PTSD is in part formed by vicarious traumas, or through vicarious traumas. So as we're learning what other people are going through, I don't know about you, but if I'm hearing about child abuse, for example, I would consider that traumatic. You know, or the details of child abuse, or the details of people with abuse, period, that hurts, right? And that builds up. Yes, sir?
So as each day as I go to work, when I talk with veterans and family members and ask them, where did you serve? When did you serve? These kinds of things. I'm actually reliving those experiences for myself. I just can't help it. It's like, oh yeah, I was in the, And so, but it does provide an opportunity every day to use those tools to try to keep it in check. But it doesn't always work. Mine tends to come out, like you were saying earlier, anger, but redirecting with these more aggro type stuff instead of that compassion, the reason I'm there.
You're absolutely right. Thank you. Yes.
I work with homeless veterans, and so sometimes my empathy is all at work. So then you get home and your friends and your family are like, yeah. So sometimes it can divide your empathy where you're only using it at a certain time instead of kind of well-rounded.
So you're switching it off at the end, in part because that's a professional identity. And then when you come home, then what does that look like? Does that extend to you also? You're turning off your emotions?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for sharing. So we have this sort of conversation about what empathy fatigue is, and at this point in the conversation, I'd just like to introduce this idea that some traditions have developed, especially when it relates to that person who's the healing person, right? Medicine man or shaman or doctor or therapist or so on. The idea is that as we're working with other people and as we're working towards healing other people or healing their circumstances, we're giving a part of ourselves, our soul, to them, right? But what happens after a while?
There's nothing
The
left
soul
to
is
give.
depleted, right? There's only so much that we have, and so that's really kind of like the idea of like when we've given so much of ourselves that the tank is empty, and so even we need to be healed. Right? Just want to do a check really quick. You don't have to answer, of course. This is a conference, and so we're not really getting into personal issues, but just to see, where are you at right now with empathy? Is that why you came to this presentation? Okay.
I think it's more like an awareness.
An awareness?
Yeah, I think you've been doing this for so long, your empathy fatigue becomes a norm, and you start working and processing out of a norm, and not so much just empathy fatigue. It's what you know what it is.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. It's good to see you again also.
You too, brother.
Okay. So thank you for sharing also, and hopefully that as we continue this conversation, we'll start to develop, you'll start to develop your own strategies or thinking about, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to shift or change? What would be a good strategy for me to develop a practice of self-care? And so, by definition, this guy, Lynn Shawcross, claims to have coined the term. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what this person says. And he defines it as empathy fatigue results from a state of psychological, emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, and occupational exhaustion that occurs as the counselors, and it doesn't have to be counselors, it could be anyone in the healthcare profession, own wounds are continually revisited by their clients' life stories of chronic illness, disability, trauma, grief, and loss. And I believe you had mentioned that, right? Yeah. It brings stuff up. That countertransference is coming up, and so we're having an emotional response also, whether we like to admit it or not, to their circumstances. Because one thing I know about trauma is that we might not have the same experiences, but there's echoes and themes that we share. Especially the experience and the manifestation of what trauma, or how trauma impacts our lives. All right, another discussion time. Have you experienced empathy fatigue, compassion fatigue, and burnout? Now we got a sense that you have, right? And some people are kind of in that realm. But when you did experience it, what does empathy look like? Empathy fatigue look like for you? And we've already discussed that a little bit. Yes.
Quitting or nearly quitting your job.
Near quitting or nearly quitting your job. Yep. Yes, yes?
Being excited when a veteran no-shows or cancels.
Thank you.
Oh my God, I love
It's
that.
like make it happen in there.
Or you like it.
Yeah, we were just talking too with the fatigue. You know, we live in a smaller community, so when our time to clock out of work is done, we go into our community, we're still seeing these faces, so we're still remembering that. It's almost like we never really get a break. So for me, what I end up doing is I've noticed over the last couple of years is I don't do those social activities anymore that I used to do after work because it's just work. It continues, it's never ending. So it's just me and the dog out in the woods with the trees, you know, that kind of thing. And I recognized it because I'm looking for another position to work. It's like, okay, it's time for me to move on because it's just getting to be a job. It's getting to be too difficult to carry this load, you know, day out. I believe that our spirit is infinite. We never really run out. You can be really depleted and empty, you know, but if you don't get that break, you can refill your tank. Right, so the self-care, and that's what brought me here today. It's like, okay, I got to pick something up that's going to help me kind of turn this around, you know. So,
yeah, thank you for that. And just to appreciate what you said, you know, working in a small community, and then after work, you're actually still in that professional identity because that's how other people see you. So you really can't get a break. Then I heard you say, you know, it just kind of like separating yourself from the community altogether. And I imagine, though, it's probably nice as a break, but is it isolating also? Because
yeah. And it's not part of my nature. I want to be a part of these activities. That's who I am. I'm out there, but I'm like, man, I want to have some of this.
So you really can't get a break.
Yeah.
I saw a couple other hands.
First, I think it also leads to a lot of guilt and shame.
Yeah.
So when you're like, I'm in this role, this is what I knew I was coming in to do this type of work, and then I think that at people's point, you feel like you got to quit so that you're not then almost taking away or in a space that you're not given what we knew like kind of was required coming into this role.
Yeah, thank you very much. And guilt and shame are really good at doing what? Like beating us up, right? And then it becomes a cycle. Thank you. Yes.
I notice I want to see my therapist more. You notice the triggers, the sensitivities, the guilt and shame kind of like I should know better. I should be able to be that role model, you know, and that kind of you put yourself like you have to be this perfect person, right? And you know. That's when I started going, oh, maybe I need to see my therapist, you know, like, because that work is, I think, necessary for the field we're in. Like, we have to do that work of what comes up and be able to keep that being with rather than being in it, you know, with individuals.
I mean, just the idea of being perfect is so much pressure. It's like constant, and you can't ever be perfect. So, okay. Thank you. I saw a couple. Yes.
I think I avoid people to like preserve my energy. You know.
Safe, preserve your energy.
Yeah.
Nice. So what does that mean? What does that mean exactly?
So I usually, you know, people you usually go around, you kind of like avoid them, just to kind of save what you have left for yourself.
Oh yeah.
Because
so you're setting
you spread yourself so thin. You
Yeah.
know? And sometimes work seems like it's fun, but at the same time you're helping people. At the same time, it takes a lot of you.
Right. Absolutely right. Yes.
I don't know about anybody else, but it almost feels like I go through all of the stages of grief whenever I hit that empathy fatigue. So I'm just like, it's mostly the question around why. Like, why do I feel this way? Because I know I'm a compassionate person and I know that I have the capability, but I'm not able to push that out anymore. I'm like, oh, I've gone too far. And then I get mad at myself and at the other person. So I'm like, why do you need this from me?
that's a great point, and especially the idea of loss, because we're losing loss of our self-concept in such a way that, as I'm hearing from you, then you demonstrate this pattern of grief or this feeling of grief because it is a loss, right? Very conscious of that. I saw your hand up, and then right here, and then right there.
So I've been pretty good about having an identity away from work, and I live and work in a small town, small communities. But I have found that I am piling on things outside of my professional identity, as well as the things that I do with my job. And so I'm trying to learn to balance what I'm doing outside with what I'm doing work as well. And where is that hard no for me? Saying I can't do anymore. I need time just for me.
A couple more hands, but really quick, just to check, how many of us have a hard time saying no? I'll raise my hand. Let's go. Because they're rationalized. They'll be like, okay, well, yeah, okay, sure, I can do that. Like, yeah, okay, no problem. But then that builds up and builds up and builds up. And sir, yes?
So, I'm hearing people talking about looking at finding other jobs and going and away from everybody and avoiding people. My solution to that was I work in a small community, but then I bought a house and live in an even smaller community 45 minutes away. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks and stuff in the car as I'm going to and from work, and then I'm active in the community I live in as well as being active in the community I work in.
Okay.
But it's two different types of being active.
And two different communities of which you have those identities. And I saw you.
So to that point, I've met a lot of police officers in my community that do similar things. They don't want the people that they serve to know where they live because they don't want people knocking on their door. They want to call them the appropriate numbers. And then I worked in the medical field, and what I've noticed is a lot of people in that field, you're almost powerless to actually solve the issues that you're facing. And so a lot of people are self-destructive as far as their health and their bodies go. And I just recently, like within the last 3 years, read a book called Boundaries, and that was referred to me, and I learned that it's very important to not lose that line between you and where the other person is, because, anyways, I'm hoping that we're going to discuss boundaries at some point.
Well, thanks to you, we will. Yes.
I kind of
an isolationist?
And also an addicted person to mindfulness.
Okay, addicted to mindfulness. Yeah. That's really interesting. What does that look like for you?
It helps me to get a balance with myself, to clean out everything. Every Wednesday I'm with therapists, but all throughout the week I'm listening to mindfulness to keep myself balanced. It's like if I go outside, I'm a magnet. Somebody says hi, and suddenly they want to stop, and how are you? And I go, fine, because I'm cautious. And then they open the floodgates. Oh, yeah, I'm doing okay, but this time is going on with me, and I don't feel, and I'm just standing there. And to extricate myself, and it becomes a difficult thing to do.
It's almost as if you're like a beacon. People can pick it up, right? And especially when we're highly empathetic, they feel it, they know, and they share out of nowhere. Yeah. A couple more.
Jeremy, I do something totally different that nobody's mentioned. Is 2 years ago I started woodturning, and I make bowls, and I make snowman, and I make all kind of stuff, and that's 1 day a week that I go and do, and frustrating in the beginning to relax, but it has just changed my life. I mean, it totally changed my life. I look at trees different, I look at wood different, I make weird things, and people go, how do you do that? So anyway, so that's totally, something.
I appreciate that.
Yes, and in Spokane, Washington, they have the Vets Garage, which, it's a wood shop, not a car garage. And so for so much a month, and they'll teach you how to do it, and I belong to the Woodturners Club, and,
that's awesome.
So it's something totally different to turn off my brain, and
And you're touching base on something that we'll get to and we'll talk about in more detail soon.
Cool. I really appreciated what the gentleman in the back said about being in your community and always having your professional hat on and people viewing you that way. My experience being in the service provision community, I've never seen so many members of the veteran and military serving community who are also part of that community, so it's sort of hard to differentiate. I mean, I like elephants, but if I served elephants, I think it would be a lot easier because I'm not an elephant, but I'm part of the military community, so it's sort of hard to, it just feels more personal to me, and I don't really know how to draw that line.
That's really interesting. Well, the idea of living and working in a community, I live in Everett. Anyone else live in Everett? Oh, yeah, no pre?
Yeah, it's that weird vortex.
Sort of, yeah. I think it's a nice community, right? It's challenging. When I first started working, when I moved to Everett, and I started working in Everett for a community mental health organization shortly after, I had this idealist sort of notion of I'm going to build the community, we're going to work tirelessly to make change and to improve the lives of the people and to improve the circumstances, right? And so I was very motivated to make change and build my community because it's important to me because this is where I live and I want to make sure that this community is strong, healthy, and resilient. But the problem is I ended up working with thousands of people, and then I would end up running into some of those thousands of people on a regular basis. And you should see me when I'm not at work. I wear cargo shorts and a t-shirt, and I wear Crocs with socks, and so it's just not. I just kind of check out, right? And then all of a sudden I'm at the grocery store, and I'm like, oh, okay. Sometimes my beard is all over the place. Oh, it's very nice to see them. Anyway, but it's difficult, right? Because then we can't turn off and we can't escape. But there's a positive and a negative. Well, not really negative, but it's challenging. I don't like the word negative, but yes.
So I'm not sure if I'm complaining the empathy fatigue or emotional capacity, but notice let's pick on New York because probably New Yorkers aren't here. Somebody falls over the street and has a heart attack, and you have all these hundreds of people just walking by not doing anything about it. Versus where you see in rural communities, you have more people. If somebody's broken down the side of the road, you're more likely to have somebody stop. Is that due to the empathy fatigue, or is that the emotional capacity that people have? Because when you're surrounded by too many people, it's just too much.
I would venture to guess that there's probably a combination of factors, right? Because when we're living in a system with tons of pressure, then we start to withdraw, right? And we start to really centrally focus on things, and it can be easy to have the blinders on. And that's my assumption. I don't know. But that's my guess, is that there's so much pressure and it's so intense all the time that we start to shut down and disconnect from our community, and that's an example of that. Because empathy fatigue and burnout and compassion fatigue and all that stuff doesn't just exist within the helping profession. Is that correct? It happens to everybody. Yes, last one.
Okay, just going off what the lady over there said about shutting off your brain. I do the same thing, except for with metal. But it's to the point where I shut off everything. That means I shut off my to-do list, I shut off my wife, I shut off my son, I shut everything off. Which, in the long run, I know is horrible. But it's what I do, and that's the reason, I guess, a lot of these guys said that they hopped in here, is because I have a thing, but I don't think a thing is working. Yeah,
a thing won't work. Unless that a thing is a combination of things. How empathy fatigue manifests and exhibits signs and symptoms. So empathy fatigue is a natural consequence of higher touch professions, right? So we talked about that saturation, the constant pressures, the constant connection in your community, whether you're working or if you're on your own. you notice that it's this constance to it, and so it's just a natural progression for everybody that can happen over time, especially if we're not always practicing. Well, I was going to say practicing the practice, but engaging in the practice of self-care and what that looks like on a daily basis. So going back to this idea of self-reflection, which we'll get to. Daily exposure to client individual stressors, we talked about that. Deterioration of our resiliency, ability to cope. I don't like resiliency. I like the word resilience. So I don't know why I put that there. But empathy fatigue reduces our ability to demonstrate resilience. Is that true? Yeah. I would think so. And then when we're less resilient, we're more prone to, and we can see there's physical consequences to this, right? Because when we're highly stressed, what happens to our bodies? Yeah, as I heard, sickness and health, and you get sick more often, for example, and other factors which we'll get into. It promotes fatigue, a lack of resilience, I don't know why I mentioned that twice, and emotional and physical decline. So some of the emotional symptoms that we can expect to see from empathy fatigue, and again, highly individualized, it matters most to the individual, so these are just some ideas. How empathy fatigue manifests in isolating yourself from others. We did talk about that, right? I heard something about that. Feeling numb or disconnected, also something that was discussed. A lack of energy to care about other things around you, also something that we discussed. You guys are on point. Feeling overwhelmed, powerless, or hopeless. And I think someone mentioned the idea of powerless over here. And you're absolutely right on that front too, because the pressures are so intense and it's so constant, even when we're at home, we're powerless to make change because the weight of it all is too heavy or can feel too heavy. Not being able to relate to others, again, something we discussed. Feeling angry, sad, or depressed. Real quick, just check in for just a side note on anger. Is it okay to feel angry?
Yes.
Yes, okay, excellent. Obsessive thoughts about the suffering of others, so we're taking work home with us, for example, and then we're not connecting with our families because we're focusing on the circumstances of the day and the individuals. Feeling tense or agitated, feeling speechless or unable to respond appropriately to what's happening around you. This is a big one, I think, because a lot of times people that we're working with, they feel speechless. They have no voice, right? Because the circumstances they're facing left them without the skills to communicate their needs effectively, right? And so then all of a sudden now we're facing those pressures and we're starting to develop these signs and symptoms, and then all of a sudden we become voiceless because we're the experts. We're the ones that are helping others, so we should be good, right? How many of you feel voiceless sometimes with your work and what you're experiencing? I see a couple hands, more gradually coming up. Yeah. Because we're the ones that people turn to for answers. And so we probably problem solvers also, right? Yes, ma'am.
I don't feel speechless. What I feel is no feeling. I can't identify my feelings. And so I lose myself in my fatigue because I don't know what I'm feeling. And if I'm feeling anything, it'll come out as anger.
Anger. All right, thank you. And then the last one, self-blame. We talked about that. Has anyone lost anyone? Anyone lost anyone to overdose? I remember their names, and I remember their faces, and I feel like I let them down. Right? That stuff stays with us, and it hurts. And it can manifest into signs and symptoms. Now, physical symptoms. It can be inability to concentrate, be productive, or complete daily tasks. We can have headaches, nausea or upset stomach. It can affect our sleep. And it says difficulty sleeping or constant racing thoughts, but you might not have racing thoughts if we can't sleep. Sometimes we're just not able to relaxing enough to get to sleep because we're off center. It can create conflicts in our relationships. We could start self-medicating with drugs or alcohol, right? We can experience changes in our appetite. We can feel exhausted all the time, and again, avoiding work or other activities, which is something else that we've already discussed. I'd like to touch base on self-medicating with drugs or alcohol. What is that? What is the self-medication?
I'm going to put myself to sleep.
I'm going to put myself to sleep. Yeah? It's a coping mechanism, right? So a lot of what we're going to be talking about with self-care are developing coping mechanisms, effective coping mechanisms that will help us live a fully realized, happy, and healthy, I don't like the word happy, but a meaningful life, right? And this is a coping mechanism, right? Self-medicating. But it's a maladaptive coping mechanism. And so through practice of self-reflection, then we can start to really pay attention to what our maladaptive coping mechanisms have become. Turning off the emotions at home, not communicating to others, keeping yourself up late at night, using drugs or alcohol as a way to escape, and so on and so forth. And then when we're able to pay attention to what our maladaptive coping mechanisms are, then we start to really differentiate what's healthy, what's unhealthy, and then make a conscious decision to do things differently. And a lot of us have already touched base on self-care already, right? And you've already offered some of your strategies, but what is self-care? And I heard there's an act, it's an act, but it's not just one act. So what is self-care? Yes. I like that. Thank you for
that. Is self-care. Self-care, my mind just went away. It's what's going to fill your cup. You know, it could be anything. It could be hanging out with your friends that you can talk to about things that are trustworthy and you feel safe with. You know, is it being able to go out in nature by yourself and just put your feet in the grass and just like, you know, relax? You know, is it going for a swim or paddleboarding or yoga?
Yeah, and
just
so
Netflix binging sometimes.
Yeah. So you're talking about activities as a form of self-care, right?
Or reading a book. Going to therapy. I know.
Thank you. Yes.
He's recognizing that you need to take self-care. You need to take care of yourself. And I didn't realize that until this year. A friend in the office said, you need to practice self-care. I said, what is that? He said, just get out of here. Go breathe outside. Don't talk to anyone. Go under a tree. Sit there. I said, really? And he goes, yeah, self-care. Really think about doing it for yourself. Do something that's going to make you relax.
Something. Absolutely. Yep. And yes.
I think you really touched on it too, as far as like self-reflection, because it's so different for each person to like really figure out what your need in that moment is, and then give yourself permission to take the 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, take the 15-minute break and actually feel that need and enjoy it, and then come back.
Everyone is familiar with the idea, thank you very much, the idea of, well, you know, have you seen a dog respond to fireworks before? What happens with that animal when they're listening to the fireworks? Can you just say, hey, calm down? Right? Because they're so in the moment, they're so anxious, and their body is tense. And this is something I think is really important to pay attention to, the state of our bodies in the presence of empathy. Is it easy to be like, oh yeah, I'm feeling this right now and I should stop? Because when we're really amped up and when we're really going through it, it's hard to pay attention to. And so, like you were just discussing, being able to recognize that, where we're at the moment, and then practice self-care is important. Yes?
You know, self-care really is an acquired skill, I've found. And yes, to what everybody was saying, but I also think that it's the self-reflection also leads to trying to overcome, let's just say, the guilt that you might feel that you're not, that you are focusing on you when you spent probably a lifetime professionally, maybe even personally, taking care of others. So the whole concept of taking care of means is really a foreign concept.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, because how many times do you feel selfish or thinking about yourself? I see some head nods. I feel selfish all the time, like I'm being totally self-absorbed or, just, selfish.
I should be doing something else. I should be.
Exactly. Yes.
I try to make myself care in those moments of you need it, you just do it anyway, because it's like, this is what I'm doing, I'm going on my walk today, and then it's like, then it kind of breaks it up, or, oh wait, I know my walk now, I'm feeling a little better, and now I can kind of see, oh, I was having a moment there, I didn't even realize it,
Yeah, and you remind me too, routine. How many of us have a routine, and when we deviate from the routine, it's like, game over. Yeah. So routine is an act of self-care also, right? Thank you. A couple more? Yes?
Me?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, okay. I notice I need more self-care is when I start being mad at myself for taking care of myself. That's one of the biggest indicators for me. If I'm I shouldn't be doing something nice for myself, and I'm like, oh, okay, you really need to do something nice for yourself.
Yeah, you're so used to giving to other people, yes.
I think it was said over here that it really depends on the moment and what's going on. Sometimes for me, there's certain people that I want to be around that are very nourishing, and other times it's like, I don't want to be around anyone, and that's what refills me.
So,
or I'm in the mood where I'm like, I'll talk to a stranger. That's wonderful.
Did everyone hear what she said?
No.
Depending on the circumstance, right? So your response is different depending on the circumstance. So sometimes it means I want to talk to strangers instead, or not talk to anybody, period. Right? Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah. As strangers as being like someone who's not, seeking support in some way. Because we can talk to a stranger and just talk about the weather, right? Or just say hi or something, and that can be refreshing, right? So not having to give of ourselves. Thank you very much. Yes.
One thing I do for self-care, and it's a unique one, but I live alone, so really cleaning the house isn't all that fun of a chore. And honestly, I hate doing the dishes, and I hate folding the laundry and putting it away. I actually hire somebody every couple of weeks to come in and do that, because after working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and I just want my time for me. So a form of self-care is taking back your time and focusing on the things you really want to do, like crochet.
Awesome. Yes. Excellent. All right. Well, let's see what the definers say for what self-care is. Self-care is what people do for themselves to establish and maintain health and to prevent and deal with illness. There's a broad concept encompassing hygiene, general or personal, nutrition, type and quality of food eaten, lifestyle, sports, activities, leisure, etc., environmental factors, living conditions, social habits, etc., and socioeconomic factors, income level, cultural beliefs, etc., and self-medication. And I would find that last part, self-medication, I don't know how I feel about this. The World Health Organization.
But that was in 1998.
It's from 98.
I'm not sure how I feel about the self-medication, but we can medicate ourselves, right? With what?
It's just
therapy.
Well, I think with the self-medication, it goes back to, are you, depending on what your health is, do you have high blood pressure? Are you taking your meds? What vitamins are you taking? What, do you take supplements for, are you in a high energy job?
things of that nature. That's how I look at it when I see self-medication instead of what we all think of as self-medication, because we're thinking of work and some of the clients that we deal with. So about self-medication.
So really investing in like supplements, for example, listen, things that will help improve our health and well-being.
Yeah. Like the essential oils, a lot of people utilize those things, and that's considered like a medication kind of thing if you look at it.
I would definitely agree with that. Or incense, or nice candles, or something like that. This is like help kind of promote this idea of calm and comfort. Yes.
And we can take into account that self-medication is also those of us who do have anxiety and depression, and that's what keeps us going if we take the medication.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. That's excellent. Yes.
And actually doing any of those things that are listed up there, personal hygiene, nutrition, sporting activities, any of those could be considered self-medication as you're going through the process.
Yeah.
There you go. Exhale.
Self-medication, right? Taking a breath and relaxing. Thank you very much. Excellent. How are we doing on time? What are we looking at? You're good. Okay, good. What does self-care look like for you? And so just real quick, we're going to go back to this one, and then we're going to talk about the impact of self-care. So really wanted to, actually, did I miss something? Because I wanted to talk about the impact of, maybe I missed it, but just real quick.
There's impact.
Impact of empathy fatigue.
There's impact right behind you.
Good. Or maybe, okay, anyways. Yeah, so let's talk about what does self-care look like for you? Yes.
So for me, I two things of metalworking, so blacksmithing and stuff like that. And the other one is, I heard a couple of people say it, but get out in nature. I'll go hike stupid miles. Go hike 50, 60 miles back into the country where absolutely nobody will be. Sit at a lake for a few days and just forget society, forget life. And so, I also know it's probably sometimes not the best idea for me to do, because I'll do it at stupid times of the year, but those things have been working great for me. And actually of lately, yoga. I've been told for years to get into yoga, and probably listen to a friend of mine, and I go 3 days a week now, and it's one of those nice things. I go at 7 o'clock, I begin 7 o'clock at night, so by the time I leave, I'm relaxed, I'm getting ready to head home and pass out.
So you do have more than one activity.
I do have more than one activity. I just have one consistent activity.
Excellent, thank you. What are some other examples? Yes, sir.
Doing something as simple as actually going into your schedule and putting a lunch in there so that they don't schedule your clients through your lunch hour. We have younger therapists that believe that they should take their lunch hours because they have all these needy people that they need to pack in as many people as they can, and I warn them about not doing that.
That's really easy to do. And you're absolutely right, because it's not just the big activities. Something as simple as scheduling lunch, taking a 15-minute break, something small like that actually makes a big difference.
Well, and then one of the routines I have is I don't stay in the office during my lunch hour. I leave.
Okay, excellent. So just kind of separate yourself from work for a little bit. And yes, Alex?
Setting rewards.
Oh, okay. So what does that look like?
Well, for me, it's going to Greece. But when you have foundational things that you're striving for, making sure that you see a release at the end at some point. So a cup of coffee at the end of the day. Being able to join your favorite book club, having those rewards that are healthy and include that emotional, spiritual, physical, or mental well-being.
Things to look forward to.
Is a great example because it gives us something to look forward to. And then, when we finally done it, then it feels good. We achieved something. We've met the objectives to such a point that now it's our time. It's for us. And like you said, the reward could be anything. It could be something physical, like an ice cream sundae, a tattoo, or a trip to Greece. Excellent. What else? Yes.
So I have a lot of different goals, especially because I have a short attention span. So I have like hobbies I do, crafting, gaming, gardening, like a lot of different things, camping, hunting, all that. But I also find myself, I have calendars all over my house, and I put like dates of things I'm excited about all over them, so I can see them every time I'm in the house. So I have an end goal, like, okay, next week this is what's going to happen. I'm really excited for it, so then I have that goal to get to.
I like, what you just said. I really like because it's almost as if you've set that up in your house in such a way that that's part of your daily routine. And it's something that's small. So I imagine it's relatively unconscious. It's something that's your routine. That's what you do, and then that's what that looks like. Okay, a couple of hands back there. Yes.
I don't bring my laptop home.
Oh, okay. So leave work at work.
Yeah, work at work.
Excellent. Yes. What else? Yes.
For me, something just as simple as turning off the radio and I drive home in silence.
Oh, yeah.
To just not have to listen to someone or something.
Yeah. How many of us use binge and get frustrated with the news? Right? So sometimes it's nice just to turn that off just a little bit. Disconnect. Yes. Yes.
Just knowing that work's going to be there the next day, and then just focus on stuff that you like doing once you get off work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So giving yourself permission to just be like, yeah, that's going to be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'll come back to it, and then we will just fine. Yes, in the back.
I have a really weird one. So I spent two and a half years at home. And that 2.5 years made me so self-isolated and not being able to have physical, seeing people, talking to people. I talk to a computer. So now that we're back in the office, my real self-care is getting out of my house so that I can love my house again. And people think I'm crazy because what I do is I can be on the road. I can work from home. But I don't want to. I want to go to an office so that I can be, that's my office space, and so that I can go home and enjoy my house again, because now I love my house, and I like going home. I walk in that door and I can close it, and it works at the office, and I love that, and that's my self-care right now.
That's a great point. How many of us, the original title for this was something to the effect of self-care, compassion, fatigue in the age of COVID, right? Mm-hmm. And so how many of us are working from home? Especially if you're COVID. No, not really? Wow, I expected to see more hands up. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
There's no separation. Especially what you're talking about. We can't just leave it at home. We can't come back to it tomorrow because it's there. That's our office and our space. And it's really difficult. Yes.
So speaking of COVID, last 2.5 years, it's been really easy to get frustrated and angry and all the things, right? Anymore, when I'm feeling all of this stuff, I try to remember how grateful I am for what I have. And it's almost an instant effect. It's like, okay, I'm good. Perspective, gratitude.
Being grateful. Excellent. Yes.
Mine, again, is mindfulness. That's my saving grace. I do it at work. I put the sign to let everybody know that I'm out for an hour. I'm in an appointment. And I go in the back, close the door, and I have mindfulness for an hour.
Mindfulness invites self-reflection. Is that true?
It does.
Yes. Yes.
Actually taking your vacation and sick days and mental health days.
Okay.
And especially if you're in a supervision role, setting that example for everyone. I roll my team in, at least once a month and ask them, how many days have you taken off in the last month? What about the last 6 months? And knowing that the place isn't going to actually catch fire when you're gone.
What?
And so part of our professional responsibility, our professional identities, and we're not doing these responsibilities, is to take care of ourselves at work, to to take time off away from work as we need to. That's a professional responsibility, right?
Yes.
Actually, I would call it maybe an obligation because the nature of our job necessitates that, right? Thank you very much. Yes?
I feel like I have a lot of things that help me feel better self-care. But I think like on the flip side of this, there's also sometimes that pressure where I see like what I want and my ideals, and I know they make me feel good. I feel like I have the time for not doing it. And that's almost the other side of this. Like I'm aware of it.
Do you think that relates to the idea of being so exhausted that it's hard to do anything?
Yeah.
And then it's like, I don't have the time for this because, okay. All right, excellent, thank you. Yes?
I have a friend who has anxiety, and one of the things she shared with me was if everything feels overwhelming and she feels really out of control, she'll focus on the 5 senses, and so she'll touch something that's soft or that feels interesting, or she'll smell something that is pleasant, or go outside and like look at green spaces. And I thought that was a really beautiful way of reconnecting to yourself. So that you can hear yourself.
I love the idea of really paying attention to the 5 senses and reconnecting. That's excellent. That's outstanding. And actually, that's a practice of mindfulness, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Yes?
I feel like I have multiple things I do depending on where I'm at, right? Like if I just spent all day in the office talking to people, helping people, then my self-care routine is silence. Whether it's hiding in the bathroom from my dogs or sitting in the car for 10 minutes before I go inside, and recognizing, I guess, those triggers, like when it's time that I need self-care. So just, I guess, having an idea of where I'm at mentally and figuring out what my best self-care routine is for where I'm at mentally.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you reminded me, too, of the idea of the difference between avoidance and self-care.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because avoidance can be symptomatic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about that, not wanting to go into work. That's avoidance. Or running away from something. And let me just make something clear. It's okay. It's okay. If that's what you need, that's an act of self-care. As long as, again, that we're paying attention to it through a practice of self-reflection or mindfulness, so that we know what we're doing, right? And I think and this is kind of like the point, right? So we want to work towards a state where we're conscious of what we're doing and why. So we're not reactive, and everything that we're doing is purposeful. Because when we're reactive, we're not connected with ourselves and our mind and our bodies. Because all we're doing, like the dog with the fireworks, we're just in that moment, and that's what our reality is, and that's what exists. And so as we react and respond to the world, it's more like a reflection, like a doctor in the knee joint, right? It's just something that happens, and it happens without our conscious effort or not. And we want to change that. So a practice of self-care is a practice of self-reflection and this sort of conscious, choice of action. Okay. Did I see any other hands? Any other questions? All right, excellent. So we talked about what self-care looks like for us, kind of, but now I want to talk about the impact. Why is it so important? Is it just for us? Self-care, I see your head shaking no. Is it just for us? No. So what's the impact? Yes?
So it's kind of like when you're on the airplane and the mask comes down and they say you should put it on yourself before you put it on anyone else. If you're not taking care of your health physically, mentally, and spiritually, you're not able to help others in the same capacity.
That's right. So we're not able to help others in the same capacity, and that has an impact, right? Yes?
It's helped me as I've learned these concepts to bring my best self back to people. It's my best self that I'm giving to my clients, my residents.
So through self-care, you're able to be present and bring your best self forward. Excellent. Yes.
So I feel like I should be, and I
try to model what's appropriate behavior, what's an appropriate response, so that the clients that I'm working with can see, this is a positive way to deal with a stressful situation versus a negative way.
Okay, excellent, excellent, thank you. Yes?
One of the kind of recently with my wife, way more especially aware of me and how I'm doing and like that, and it's actually me starting to implement more self-care is definitely helping us. And so helping that home life, connecting with my almost 15-year-old kid now, and just connecting a little bit more and realizing, hey, if I take care of myself, I can take better care of my family.
I like the idea of the ripple effect, right? So with this, it's more than just we're able to show up for work, because when we're able to show up for work effectively, then we're able to make change in the individual's life. And if their circumstances are ameliorated, then they can go out and in turn, that ripples, right? So then when I think about it, it's important. It's not just important for ourselves, but it's important for others. It's important for our community. And if we're in these professions, these helping professions, then we're not in it for the money, are we? Yeah, it's like, no, there's no money in it. Well, you can pay our bills and all that stuff. That's great. You can go on vacation, sure. But it's not about the money, is it? It's about what?
Caring.
Oh.
Caring, supporting.
Caring, supporting, yes.
Making an impact.
And we're working with community. We're working with community. So then it's about our communities. And so if we're dedicated to this practice of self-care, then we're dedicated to our communities and doing what's best for ourselves, then we can do what's best for our community, right? At least that's how I approach it anyway. So again, highly individualized, and I saw your hand up.
Yeah, one of the best things that I heard someone say to a new staff member who would come on and first time case managing and things was to say, don't let the reason you love your job be the reason you leave the job.
I think that's the winning comment of the day. Awesome.
Can you repeat that for the people in the back?
Yeah.
Don't let, well, you should say it.
Don't let the reason you love the job be the reason you leave the job.
That's a pretty good statement.
No, we missed it again.
Don't let the reason you love the job be the reason you leave the job.
Okay, thank you.
So there is an impact, right? So when we're taking care of ourselves, we're taking care of others. Like the Veterans Conservation Forum, we heal the planet, we heal ourselves, right? And that brings benefit to everyone. All right, so the presentation pretends to be over, but it's not. I actually have homework for each of you really quick. We have about 20 minutes left, and I'm going to go across the room and I'm going to ask each of you to make a commitment to one act of self-care this weekend. And I'm going to ask you just to let everyone know what that act is. You feel comfortable doing that? Okay.
I'm going to crochet.
I'm going to do that too. I'll make a blanket.
Exercise, yes.
I'm going to work in my garden.
Garden?
So walk to the park.
Walk to the park. Go to the gym. Exercise.
I'm already doing it. I'm camping.
Camping. Take a nap. I like that.
Going to church.
Church high.
Coming here and connecting with
Oh, man, I like that. Thank you very much. And actually, that's an important statement, right? Because it's talking about connecting to community, connecting to other people, right? And when we're working so hard and we start to shut down, we feel isolated and alone, right? Or we run the risk. And when we're isolated, one of the greatest tools for recovery from that is connecting to others in community. I believe completely that community is what we need the most. When we're feeling it, we need others, right? Because that helps us heal ourselves. Yes. And it's okay to say no, because that's an act of self-care too.
Helping a group honorable delivery.
Excellent. Helping out. Thank you very much. Yes.
Getting my nails done for Greece.
Nails. All right.
Exercise.
Exercise.
I have no idea.
Okay. Excellent. Speaking to your needs. That's good. Yes.
Yoga.
I'm sorry.
Yoga.
Yoga. Nice.
Taking a hike without kids.
A hike without kids. Space and boundaries. Yes.
I'll wait till Monday to catch up on all the emails that we piled up.
Oh, I like that. Yes.
Take a walk.
Take a walk. Church.
Ride my bike.
Bike. Hiking.
This is my daughter and son-in-law. It's the second anniversary of being a cooperative leader and go for support.
So helping with family and supporting everything. Thank you very much.
Mill up some lumber.
I'm sorry?
Mill up some lumber.
All right, mill up some lumber. Excellent.
I'm a volunteer firefighter, and this is my first weekend off in like 2 months, hopefully save my life.
Good luck.
Take my cat for a walk.
I'm working on that.
Georgia's mountain, so you get my grandkids.
Nice. Excellent. Yes.
Taking care of my horses and dogs, and then taking the cell phone and turning it off so it doesn't dictate my life.
Oh, cell phones. Yes. Yes.
Just 30 minutes of silence.
Ah, I like that. That sounds good. Yes.
Spend time with my partner.
Spend time with your partner. Excellent.
Probably cuddling my dog. I miss him so much being here.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you.
Taking my dog to the lake.
Lots of plays. Okay. Basketball.
Shredding some documents and giving them a massage.
Music. That's the first time someone makes music. Yes.
Driving all the way back to the Friday night summertime.
Don't do that.
Sam and the other fiber person, so there's a yarn shop about it.
Big Rose is building an enclosure for our.
As of 3 o'clock today, I will be on vacation at my daughter's 100-acre farm right here.
Wow. Wow. Awesome. Can't miss it.
We will stay.
Okay. You take care of stuff and you can take care of that. Right. Nice. Motorcycle ride. Nice. Excellent. Okay. Jim.
Call it good.
Oh, yeah. Drums, yes. Thoughts for a walk?
I'm going to dress down and not be as professional as the rest of you. As soon as I walk out here, I'm going to put on my cheap sweats and my lazy t-shirt. Honestly, I'm going to enjoy myself.
Good, yes.
Right into Montana.
Try to summit a mountain.
Summit a mountain?
Yeah.
Nice.
A big mountain.
This is music? Knitting a sweater. Outstanding.
I'm going to be spending time with family and friends at the lake, just being present.
Being present. I like that. Yes, excellent. Thank you. So, one of the reasons why I asked everyone to share a strategy for self-care is, did I miss anyone?
Yourself.
Oh, well, I'm going to get to that actually. It's because we're. Did someone? Oh, yes. Do you have a strategy for self-care as a for homework for this weekend?
Yeah, mine is I already recon a couple of fishing spots on the way up. Just so nice, I don't even care if I catch fish. The scenery was just absolutely spectacular. So.
Excellent.
And the doggo.
Excellent. So why did I ask everyone to give an example of what they'll do for self-care?
Different ideas.
Different ideas, right? Because in part, what's that?
It's reinforcing.
It's reinforcing, and in part, you're here to develop strategies for self-care. So in order to do that, we have to start thinking. We have to start thinking. We have 2 minutes. Man, I thought I had till 9:30.
Oh, is it 9:30?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. You have 17 minutes. Sorry.
Stress.
So some of us came here to really start to learn these strategies for self-care. And there's something that I think we touched base on it a little bit. So we each mentioned a pretty big activity, right? It was something significant. Visiting family, going fishing, deep sea fishing, hiking, exercise, yoga, all sorts of these things, right? And they're an axe. But what else? What else does self-care look like?
I was just thinking, one of the things that everybody's saying something, when you hear yourself saying something, you're sort of more committed to doing it because now you've heard it and a lot of other people have heard it. So you're more apt to do it.
You're absolutely right. So hearing what other people are doing and speaking to it actually helps change the way we think about it, and it becomes easier to practice, right? So what I'm looking at for self-care are those examples that you described, but also everything. What is our practice? And this is the question I'm going to ask of you. When you leave the building today, you head home, you go back to life without a conference, what does the daily routine of self-care look like? What is your daily practice of self-care? Big and small. Yes?
Just allowing yourself to have that time.
Yes?
Saying yes to yourself.
I like the idea of saying yes to yourself, right? You should. Yes?
I sigh a lot, and it doesn't actually mean like I'm upset or anxious. I just go, and then some people always go like, "Oh, what's wrong?" I'm like, "Nothing. Like I'm great now." So I like to sigh a lot throughout the day.
Silence, taking a breath, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so real quick, I'm gonna guess about my self-care, and so I'm gonna show you. And this is a bag that I took with me when I served in Iraq, right? So this is a med bag for foreman, and it used to have all sorts of medical gear in it, and it actually still has DNA attached to this thing. This thing has been with me since 2002. And then in 2003, I took it home with me and used to have a different meaning. But part of my self-care is developing a practice in which I reassociate stressors into something more positive. And so now this bag is not the bag from Iraq. It's my skate bag. Right? And when I'm roller skating is like, man, it's like a teacher. It's like teaching us resilience. Because when I first started roller skating, I sucked so bad. I fractured my hip.
Oh no.
I broke this finger. Can't get right. And I tore ligaments in my knees, and they had contusions all over the place. Right? But I kept at it because there was something about skating that really connected to me. And you know what it was? It was when I was roller skating, the world could not touch me. Even if the floor was full of people and little turds, little kids. cutting you off and just making life really interesting on the floor. But when I'm on my skates and I'm on the floor and I have my headphones in, listening to dubstep or heavy metal or hip hop or dance music, something with a good beat to it, then I find my own groove. Anyone see how Stella got her groove back?
Yes.
Right? So self-care is a practice of reclaiming ourselves and our groove through small acts of kindness towards yourself and towards others, and even those big acts like fishing, seeing family, and that sort of thing. And I think if we're going to take anything away from self-care from today's conversation, is that self-care is our daily lives. Going to bed on time, eating healthy, sometimes not eating healthy, but saying that's okay too. An act of unconditional positive regard, so we're not beating ourselves up, and we're giving ourselves the freedom to be people, to be human beings, right? Because human beings are what? Complicated. We're a complex dichotomy of hypocrisy and love and strength and power and hurts and everything. Our species is a hot mess. And our culture facilitates that mess to such a way that we internalize everything into guilt and shame and self-blame.
Okay.
And so when I'm skating, I have my own space, I have my routine, and nothing can touch it.
And you're taller.
And I'm taller. That's right. I'm going to do this more often. So that's the presentation. And I want to say thank you to everybody for attending. And also, please be mindful about where you're at. Please pay attention to what your body is telling you, because your body is holding on to more than you realize. And when we're conscious about what we're experiencing physically and emotionally, then we can make conscious choices to better our circumstances. And when we do that, then we better the circumstances of the people that we work with, the veterans that we serve, and our communities. Thank you very much. Are there any questions, any feedback from today's presentation? And if you could scan the QR code, the future code, and leave feedback, positive and critical feedback is necessary for this to be a better presentation in the future. So to be honest, yes.
More skating. Yeah.